When I think back on my childhood, my mind often leads me back to my driveway. My driveway and in my carport, maybe for some of you it was your garage like this. See, for me, when I was young, I would do sidewalk chalk. I spent a lot of time there. I would ride my bike. And then I got into sports and I started playing basketball. And I spent a lot of time in my driveway just practicing, just dribbling the basketball. We eventually got a goal, and so I'd work on shots, I'd work on layups. I really wanted to be a good basketball player. Now, y'all don't laugh, okay? If you have seen me outside of a video, you know I'm a little bit vertically challenged, right? But this is before that was a real issue for me, right? And I'll never forget the first basketball game I got to play in. I was so excited. I'd been practicing all week. I'd been preparing myself for it. And I just knew that coach was going to put me in this game. And so I was at home. I'd been practicing. It was time for the game. I get to the game and coach says, "Ben, do you want to play?" And I said, "Yes, sir." Like, I've been preparing for this. I've been practicing for this. I've been spending countless hours in my driveway and in my carport just dribbling and getting the fundamentals down. And so I got in the game, and he put me as point guard. Again, don't laugh. This was before the vertical issue. And I was just dribbling down the court. And as I was dribbling down the court, I noticed that the lane was wide open. So I decided I was going to drive it straight to the basket and do a layup. So I started to drive into the lane, and something unexpected happened. One of the defensive players jumped in my face, put both of his hands out, and went, "Ball, ball, 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 ball." Have you ever seen anybody do this? Like, it shocked me. It wasn't something I could prepare for in this driveway scenario, right? And it startled me so much that I did something. I was dribbling, and once they started shouting, "Ball, ball, ball," I picked up my dribble. Now, if you know anything at all about basketball, you know that once you pick up your dribble, you can't put it back down. Like, once you've picked up the ball, you can't start back dribbling again. You see, but what I wanted to do in that moment of panic, of that moment of crisis, of that moment of not understanding what I should do next, is I just wanted to go straight back to doing what I was doing. But I knew I couldn't, so I just stood there frozen. And then I hear my coach shouting, "Ben, pivot, pivot." You see, the verb pivot means to literally just change directions. It means just to shift directions. And he was telling me in that moment, "Hey, Ben, you've picked up your dribble. There's no opportunity in front of you. There's a big guy going ball, 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 ball. It's time for you to learn to pivot so that you can actually look for a new trajectory, look for a new opportunity, look for a new path." Because where I was heading after I picked up the ball, I could not pass and I could not shoot. So I had to turn and shift in order for that to happen. I think in our lives, oftentimes we've been dribbling, things have been good, we feel prepared, and all of a sudden something makes us pick up our dribble. I think many of us in COVID-19 and this coronavirus have picked up our dribble. And now we're standing here and we're panicked because there's something in front of us that we weren't prepared for. And all of a sudden, all we want to do is just start back dribbling. All we want to do is just go back to normal. Can I tell you something? I don't think you want to go back to normal. Now, I could be wrong. This might be where some of you get to check out on this sermon, okay? If you look at your life prior to COVID-19, prior to whatever the circumstance is, prior to whatever the crisis may be, prior to this pandemic that we're facing, and you look at that situation and go, "You know what? I look at my work life and my family life, I look at the balance and I was happy with it. I look at my life, I look at my faith journey, I look at my walk with the Lord and I was pleased. I think about time. When I think about time, I don't think of it as a burden. I think of it as a blessing." If that's your answer, then hey, I give you permission. Start dribbling. Go back to normal. Whatever normal is. Normal is just what you experienced in your mind prior to this situation. Everybody thinks they want to go back to what they were experiencing prior. But I think that for most of us, we need to realize that if we go back to where we were, we're just going to be stuck. We're going to be stuck on a trajectory, stuck on a path that's not leading to an opportunity for you to do anything to get points on the board. And so in this moment, we have to ask ourselves, are we going to pick up the ball And are we going to pivot, or are we just going to try to put it right back down where we got it? Peter, which is one of Jesus' disciples, really struggled in the midst of a crisis, in the midst of his situation, in the midst when he didn't understand what was happening and he began to panic. You see, Jesus called his disciples and he called Peter to come and follow him. Before this, Peter was just a fisherman. That's what he had done. He was a fisherman. He had provided for himself and his family by fishing. And Jesus said, hey, stop fishing for fish and fish for men. What he was saying was, listen, stop trying just to provide for you. I will provide for you if you'll go out and be my provision to the world, if you'll go out and advance the kingdom. And so Peter started following Jesus. He recognized him as the Messiah. He was excited about what Jesus had come to do, the prophecies that he had come to fulfill. But then Jesus died, and that shook him. Then Peter denied him, and that shook Peter because he didn't think he'd ever deny Jesus. Then Jesus was resurrected, and Peter was trying to understand, and the rest of the disciples were trying to wrap their minds around this. And then they were kind of excited, but then Jesus said, hey, but I'm actually going to leave you. I'm going to heaven. I'm going to send a helper called the Holy Spirit to guide you, but I'm going to leave. And Peter kind of just found himself stuck. He picked up his dribble, and he began to evaluate the situation. And all he wanted to do was just put the ball right back down. John chapter 21, verse 2 says this: Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, which is James and John, and 2 other disciples were together. So they were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, got in the boat, but that night they caught nothing. See, Peter was like, I'm just going to go back to what I know. I'm going to go back to as if this whole Jesus thing had never stopped me in my tracks, as if this whole situation and now crisis and now confusion had not just made me pick up my dribble. I'm just going to go put the ball right back down. I'm going to go back to my normal. But his new normal was leading him nowhere, and by this passage it says he caught nothing. His normal now was still not leading him to see something that he longed to see. Here we go. Jesus arrives on the scene. Verse 4. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that this was Jesus. So Jesus sees his disciples going back to their old ways, and he stands on the shore. This is what he says. He says, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, so throw your net on the right side of the boat. He said, hey, listen, that pattern that you've been using, that rhythm of throwing to the left side is not producing what you want. So why don't you try a new pattern? Throw it to your right side and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped in the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, only about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back in the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared to ask, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. Pivot. Hey, Peter, I know the situation has made you pick up your dribble. I know you were going through life on this normal pattern. You were doing these things just like you thought, but then you picked it up, and now it's time to pivot. But I just want to put it back down. I don't think you do. How about we try pivoting? Now, pivoting is really important in this moment because when we pivot, we realize that our current path isn't leading to our potential. So we have to pivot some things in our lives. The things that we need to understand in this moment is for Peter, the death of Jesus, even the resurrection, but then also his soon ascension will determine what he does next. And right now he's thinking, I just want to go back to what I know. I want to know back to what it was. Church, we are pivoting. As a nation and as a world, we have to pivot. We've all realized this. You as individuals are going to have to pivot. We're realizing that we have to evaluate all the things around us and make a decision on what we're going to do. Today, I think we're going to pivot. So I want you to turn to somebody next to you and just say, pivot. Say, pivot. I'm going to pivot in this moment. And we're going to pivot in 3 areas. I'm going to talk about 3 areas that I believe that this pandemic, that this COVID-19 has made us realize we need to pivot. This pandemic is a catalyst for us to pivot in an area of our life that we needed to pivot for a long time, but it wasn't until we were stopped in our tracks. It wasn't until we had to pick up the ball. It wasn't until we had to evaluate during this circumstance that we realized that now was the time to pivot. But now we will see new results and we will pivot. That's what we'll do. So what areas do we need to pivot? The first area that I think we need to pivot are our priorities. I think we all agree with this. I think we can all look at our lives right now and realize that our priorities have been off. That we have not set the proper priorities in place. That we have not had a good balance in our life. That we have poorly resourced the areas of our lives that we want to see actually grow. That's how you know what a priority is, right? Whatever you give your time, your talent, and your treasure is, that's your priority. So if you're like, Ben, I don't know what my priorities are. Well, all you have to do is look at your calendar. What does your calendar say your priorities are? Look at your checkbook. What does your checkbook say your priorities are? And your priorities will actually reveal what your heart says. Luke chapter 12, verse 34, for where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. So let's look at Peter for a second. John chapter 21, we just read it. I'm going out to fish. His priority was himself. His priority was selfishness. Simon Peter told them and they said, we will go too. So they went out, got in the boat, but that night they caught nothing. So, what are your priorities? There's a funny joke. I think it's a funny joke. There's a young boy who came to Sunday school late and his teacher knew that he was usually very prompt and he asked if anything was wrong. He said, yeah, well, not really. I was just going to go fishing, but my dad told me I needed to go to church. And the teacher was very impressed and asked the boy if his dad had explained to him the importance of going to church instead of fishing. And the boy replied, yes, he did. Dad said he didn't have enough bait for both of us. Right? Our priorities. That's where all of this begins to shift, is we need to reveal what's on our heart and learn that we have gotten our priorities out of order. And so now is a time to pivot our priorities. The second thing I think we need to pivot, we need to turn, we need to shift are our patterns. John chapter 21, Jesus called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No. So they're not seeing the results they want to see, so they decide in this moment to keep doing the same thing, the same pattern. Jesus said, throw your net on the right side of the boat. Change your pattern and you will find some fish. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Listen to me. Your intentional daily patterns and rhythms develop ideal progress and desired futures. But so many of us have a desired product that we want to see ourselves produce, but we don't do the patterns that produce the product. Do you hear me? You want different results, but we keep doing the same thing, thinking the same thing will result in something different, but that's not how it works. You don't get new things by doing the same patterns. You get new things by doing the pattern that produces that product. Some of us, let's just be honest, we're looking at a friend's life and we're saying, man, I wish I had finances like them. Or we're looking at someone's marriage and saying, I wish I had the type of marriage they have. Or we're looking at someone's health and saying, I wish that I was as healthy or had that lifestyle that they have. But we want what they have, but we're not willing to do what they did to get it. This is that moment where we're seeing, listen, our patterns have to change. Proverbs 20, those too lazy to plow in the right season will have no food in the harvest. One day, this is just a few days ago, my son Kai said, hey, what are we about to do? And I said, we're about to eat dinner. And he goes, and then what are we going to do? And I said, then we're going to go to bath. And then he said, then what are we going to do? And I said, then we're going to go to bed. And then he goes, then we're going to wake up and do it all over again. right? Like our daily rhythms. We have rhythms, we have patterns in our lives, and some of us have just started going through them without any intentionality, and these patterns are not producing what you want to see. And it's not just that it's not producing your daily product, not your daily satisfaction, but your days are a microcosm of your whole life. And so unless we can start to win our days, we're never going to win our future. So we got to start looking at our daily patterns of what in our lives need to shift. I think we all recognize this, and if you're happy with your results, then keep doing your same patterns. But if you want to see something more, if you're looking 5-10 years down the road and you see something else that's different, it's not going to actually be reached until you make something change and be different today within your patterns. And then the third thing we need to pivot is our progress. You need to pivot your progress. John chapter 21, continuing. Then the disciples, whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. You see, here's what I mean by saying you need to pivot your progress. One of the biggest excuses for not making changes in our lives, not pivoting to areas that we need to pivot, is that we've gone too far. Well, I can't change careers. Like, no, this isn't the future I want. No, this isn't the career I dreamed of. But I started this job 10 years ago to get my feet out from feet underneath me. It was a blessing from God that I got it. I've been here for 10 years now, and I can't change now. Well, when are you going to change? Do you expect to get that future that you want by living a life that doesn't take any steps towards that future? All because you've just been there too long? Well, listen, I have this group of friends, and I know they're not good. I know that they tear me down in my walk with Jesus. I know that I'm not healthy when I'm around them. But dude, I've known them for years. Like these are my boys, or these are my girls. Like this is who I've gone through life with. We've been close for 10 to 12 years. Listen, you're going to become what you're around. And that's fine, but you need to look around you and say, listen, am I in the world to win the world, or am I in the world to be part of the world? And the excuse of, I've been doing it so long, is really, are you going to let that limit you from what's ahead? You're going to let your current satisfaction, your current, just that low-hanging fruit, that easy, I already know it concept, ruin getting what you know God has for you. Peter went back to fishing. He went back to fishing because, you know what? I've been doing it a long time. I mean, this is what I've worked towards. No, it doesn't give me the results of the things I want in life, but it's what I've been doing. But immediately when he saw Jesus, immediately when he heard it was the Messiah, he left realizing what he had done and went to the shore to be with Jesus. So, the best way I could put this last idea of that we need to pivot our progress, is maybe you've heard the term that you're stuck in a rut. You ever feel like you're stuck in a rut? A rut, the original term comes from when the people had wagons and there would be lots of wagon tracks, and someone else's wagon wheel would get stuck in someone else's wagon track, so they couldn't actually go the direction they wanted to go. Their wheel just kept following the wagon in front of them. Now, the way I know this term is from, I grew up in Greenville, Alabama, and one of the things we did for fun was go mud riding, right? And I knew what getting in a rut was, because you would go through the areas where people have been mud riding. You'd either get stuck in someone else's rut, or you would create a rut, and the rut would build up so much mud on each side of your tire that you could only go back and forth. You couldn't get out. But every good person who knows how to mud ride knows that you can get out. You just got to turn the wheel hard, give it a little bit of gas, and you got to pop out of that rut. You're just going back and forth in that same rut. It's getting deeper and deeper, and for some reason you think some magic wand is going to offer you something different, when God is saying, listen, I have a way for you. Pivot. Turn the wheel, give it a little gas, and let's change our just because we have progress in that area doesn't mean it's the potential you want for your life. Just because you have progress doesn't mean it's guiding you towards what God has for you. Just because you have progress doesn't mean it's God honoring. Just because you have progress doesn't mean it's kingdom advancing. Just because you have progress doesn't mean this progressing in the areas and in the ways that you long to be progressed. Now, here's the thing about pivot. Pivot is not just a verb. Pivot is also a noun. So we know we need to pivot, we need to turn in these three areas. But actually, the first thing that happens when you pick up your dribble is you have to choose your pivot foot. Like, that's the first choice you have to make, is what foot is going to get planted. Pivot as a noun means the point on which things pivot. Like that central pivot point. So when you choose your pivot foot, now that foot can't move, but now you can only pivot around that foot. Does that make sense? I can't just spin in circles. Like, because I'm not grounded. You have to plant your foot and pivot off of that. So I think there's three areas that we need to pivot on in order to pivot these three areas and change them. In order to pivot our priorities, in order to pivot our progress, in order to pivot our patterns, we have to actually plant our foot on something. We actually have to have a pivot point. What's our pivot points? The first one I think needs to be noted, and I think we're all starting to realize this, is family. Your family, you should be so grounded in it that everything pivots on your family. Now, this is the first responsibility that was ever given to us. When Adam was made and then Eve was made, they were meant to care for each other. That's why he created Eve, so that she could care for Adam and that Adam could care for her before they cared for the rest of the world. Before they cared for the task before them, they had to care for each other. Actually, it reminds us of this in 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his own family, especially for his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. One time I had a man come up to me and bring a 5-gallon bucket of water, and he told me to put my arm in it, and I put my arm in it, and he said, now pull your arm out. I pulled it out, and he said, did you see that? I said, I didn't see anything. He said, do it again. Did it again. Did you see that? Nope. He says, you didn't see the hole your arm left? I said, no. He goes, well, good, because there actually was a hole, but as quick as you pulled your arm out, it filled with water. And I want you to know that every area of your life, as quickly as your arm came out and this hole was filled with water, God can use someone else to fill everything you're doing in your life, except for your family. Your family is the only place that if you removed yourself, that hole can't be filled by anyone else. Listen to me, ladies, just for a second. You can get coffee, you can do whatever you want to do. Men, listen to me for a second. The biggest pandemic that is in our world right now is not COVID-19, is not the coronavirus. It is absent fathers. Now, ladies and other people listening, listen, I understand that some things have gone already so far that you can't help it. You're in a broken home or whatever has happened. And listen, keep trotting, keep moving forward. God can do an amazing thing and is doing amazing things in that situation. But men, listen to me. If you are being absent from your family, even if you're present there, but absent in heart, absent in emotion, absent in presence, listen, you are setting the future up for failure. And it's time for you to say, I'm going to step in and be something. Listen, here's why. When you pick up the ball and you pivot, I can't put the ball back down. All I can do is either pass it or shoot it. And who are you going to pass it to if you're not actually setting people up? If you're an absent father, who are you going to pass it to? What's your legacy actually going to look like? How are you going to advance the kingdom? And how are you going to get points on the board if you're just standing there pivoting around and being absent from the one who you can toss the ball to? All right. Do you hear me? Family. Number 2, I think we need to pivot our future. Not the future that's in front of you, but the future you long to see. I think we need to plant our foot in what God has called us to. John chapter 21, fast forward. Now Peter is talking to Jesus at this fire, and Jesus says to Peter, do you love me more than these? And he says, yes, Lord. You know I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. See, the future that Peter saw was being a fisherman, providing for himself. But Jesus said, I see a better future for you, and that's providing for my sons and daughters. That's providing for others. So let me provide for you, and let me show you a new future. And the last thing that we need to pivot is your faith. We have to pivot on our faith. We pivot with a foot in our family, a foot in our future, and we strongly root our foot in our faith. Colossians 2:7, let your roots grow down into Him and let your lives be built on Him. Then your faith will grow strong in the truth you were taught, and you will overflow with thankfulness. Do you want a life that is so full of God that it overflows with thankfulness? Do you want a life that has so much to be thankful for that it overflows thankfulness? Do you want to see families redeemed? Do you want to see your career change? Do you want to see your future bright? Do you want to see God advance? Do you want to see the kingdom known? Then you have to plant your foot in your faith. This is what God's called us to. pivot. It's time to turn and to plant yourself in the things that need to be planted and to change the things in your life that you now realize have to change. After you pivot, you have to decide, how am I going to get points on the board? Are you going to be able to pass it? Are you going to be able to resource? Are you going to be able to have shoulders for others to stand on? Are you going to get open and actually be able to take the shot? It's not going to be done unless your foot is planted in your faith. Let's pray together.